This presentation of the Sensory Profile Assessment Tool is done by Justin Haycraft and Courtney Bowling. The Sensory Profile was written by Katana Brown and Winnie Dunn. It was published by Psychcorp of Pearson Clinical. It can be purchased at Pearson Canada Assessment Incorporated. The price of the complete kit will be $241. The length of administration will be a maximum of 1 hour and 10 minutes. That is for the whole kit. The caregiver questionnaire portion will last around 30 minutes, while the short sensory profile portion of the assessment will last 10 minutes, and the summary score will last 20 to 30 minutes. The reason the assessment was developed was to assess a child's sensory performance when combining with other evaluations to determine a child's level for intervention planning. The most appropriate ages to administer the sensory profile assessment to include children between the ages of 5 and 10 years old, but it can also be administered to children ages 3 to 4 as well. The type of clients you will administer this assessment to include people with physical disabilities, people with psychiatric conditions, and people with no identifiable disabilities. The primary purpose of the assessment is it is used to evaluate everyday sensory experiences and how one processes those senses. The sensory profile is a tool for linking performance strengths and barriers with the child's sensory processing patterns. It is used to evaluate the possible contributions of sensory processing to the child's daily performance patterns, as well as assist in identifying sensory barriers. The sensory profile assessment tool covers the following: sensory processing categories of visual, auditory, touch, taste, smell, movement, and a general category for activity level. The contradictions of the assessment is that it is a self-report questionnaire. This can cause unreliable readings due to a caregiver guessing or recording incorrectly, or unclear directions when the caregiver is giving the questionnaire. The assessment tool has no adaptations or unique procedures when giving the assessment. The sensory profile can be useful in OT by using the results to determine the level of difficulty of OT treatment sessions, and also form an idea of the patient's level of performance in their daily lives. An OTA can administer the assessment. The scoring of the assessment is a little different. If the OTA is new to sensory processing, they should seek input and help with interpretation of the assessment tool from a professional with an extensive background in sensory processing before implementing sensory profile interpretations in their reports.
The sensory profile has several components, such as the summary score sheet, the caregiver questionnaire, self-questionnaire, and a teacher questionnaire. Typically, you will give the teacher, the caregiver, the parent, and the self-questionnaire to the child. Right now, but we're only going to be focusing on the caregiver and the summary score sheet. The caregiver questionnaire would be given to the parent or the caregiver of the child, and they will be explained of what the questions are regarding towards, how to score it, as well as including the information of the child's name, date of birth, the date that the questionnaire was completed. So the way that they will be filling this out is through a grading of 5 grades, always being the score of a 1 when they are going to go back and score it on the summary score sheet. So 1 to 5 being never. And as you can see, always, it would be known as when presented with the opportunity, your child always responds in this matter 100% of the time, to never of 0% of the time. The questionnaire is separated into different parts, such as auditory processing, visual processing, vestibular, and touch, multisensory, oral, and sensory processing related to endurance and tone, as well as multiple other ones. The parent should not really worry about these little symbols. Those are for the therapist when they are grading it. So such questions might be, the child prefers to be in the dark, always, frequently, occasionally, seldom, to never, as well as other types of sensory dislikes riding in a car, seeks out certain tastes, and they will actually list certain tastes that they seek out. Mouse objects, for example, pencil or hands. Locks joints, for example, elbows or knees for stability. And then the caregiver, if they have any additional questions, they'll add comments. But it is the therapist that will go back, add these individually, and put the section raw score total. They do that for all separate sections. And then they'll go over to the summary score sheet, which has all information, the date tested, date of birth and chronicle age, the year, month, and day, the gender, service provider's name, as well as the child receives following services, and if the child already has conditions already known. So into this, we see that it doesn't look very similar. It does somewhat look similar to the questionnaires, where they do have these symbols, they have the questions, and they have different factors and sections. So going to the questionnaire, they will take, for example, the sensory processing. They don't line up with here because you have to go to question 8. They would have the always to never, pick that, find what they picked, say they picked occasionally, you add the 3 points. And you do that for all of these sections, find the questions and filling that number in and adding those to the factor raw score total. After you get that raw total, you go over to this pretty little table. You put the factor raw score total down right here. And based on what that raw score total is, they would either show typical performance, probable difference, or definite difference. And then you go to the back where they have the top right here in the green, sensory processing. They would have that here as well. So where they have the section of raw score total in the questionnaire, that's where they will put this in this total right here. And similar to the previous page, they have typical performance, probable to definite. And this is how they grade them. And if they have a definite difference, they show a sensory issue that needs to be called upon and have attentions to. And that concludes the demonstration and explanation of the sensory profile, the caregiver, and the summary score sheet.